Today on CityCast DC, welcome to 2025. A lot happened in DC over the last week and a half, and we are here to round up what you missed. So we're going to be talking about crime, which is down. We're going to be talking about a new football stadium, which might still be going up. And will you turn right on red this year? I'm here with my CityCast colleagues Priyanka Tilve and Julia Karen, and we are going to debate that hot question. Today is Friday, January 3rd. I'm Michael Schaefer, and here's what DC is talking about. Hey, Julia.
Hey, Mike.
Hey, Priyanka.
Hello.
Happy New Year, dudes.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. I feel like so much happened.
I know.
So much did happen, guys.
So, right when everyone was leaving for the holidays, there was this panic. Congress might not pass the bill that would transfer the land to the District of Columbia that would let DC turn the current home of decrepit RFK Stadium into something that might include a new football stadium. And then it was a Christmas miracle. The measure passed, as people know, and now we get to have a big old civic argument about a football stadium. Or do we? Julia, I don't know. The Commanders are good. Is the fix in? What's happening?
So here's the deal. For people who, like me, were asleep at 1:15 a.m. on December 21st, 2024, this got passed through the Senate. Basically, the deal is DC is getting a 99-year land lease for the RFK site. Joe Biden, who's still the president, has to sign it. But once he signs it, it's a done deal. And at that point, DC can start talking with the Commanders' ownership, so that's the Josh Harris group, about a stadium at that site and the cost and all the fun stuff we just had with regards to Ted Leonsis and Capital One Arena. The big thing here is that Bowser has said she wants commercial stuff going on, shops, restaurants, etc., and also real estate things happening. She wants people to be able to live there. She doesn't want it to just be a stadium. She wants Nats Park 2.0. So we're going to see if that happens. In order to get this through, she had to talk with Rep. James Comer from Kentucky, and he's a Republican. And they worked together to get this done. And honestly, that in itself is a Christmas miracle that they shunted it through. So
it's interesting because in this case, it's not just the Commanders, the Josh Harris group that they're going to have to negotiate with. They're also going to have to negotiate with the community, with the neighborhood, because this is an area of town where a lot of people have said that they might not want a stadium. They might want just housing, or they might want just retail, or what have you been reading in regards to that?
Yeah. So the short answer is the Commanders' view of this is that now they can treat every option that they previously could have or didn't have equally. DC is actually in play now, as opposed to hypothetically being in play if they won the land back or whatever. Maryland still is sort of in play. There have been reassurances. Part of the reason that this was held up was Chris Van Hollen and Ben Cardin, who are the reps from Maryland, basically said they supported the land transfer after working to level the financial playing field, after the Commanders basically gave written assurances about how they would redevelop the 200 acres at the home of Landover at Northwest Field.
Basically, Maryland was trying to block Senate from passing the RFK Stadium bill, and then they were like, okay, fine, if you promise to redevelop the Landover site regardless, then you can go. Am I understanding that? Okay.
Yes, that's correct. Now, it's possible the Commanders still pick Landover. That's not out of the realm of possibility entirely. Virginia, if Glenn Youngkin is feeling, slighted from the gotcha incident that Mayor Bowser pulled.
And if he could actually get Virginia Senator L. Louise Lucas on board.
Sure, hypothetically, Virginia could swoop in. It is sort of looking not quite like the fix is in, but that DC now has the best fighting chance it's probably had in a while. Part of this is because the Commanders are actually a good team. They've made the playoffs for the first time since 2020. The last time they won 11 games in a season, they won a Super Bowl.
When was that?
That was the 91-92 season.
So what's weird about this is in DC, often things are local issues and then they become national issues. And this has sort of gone the other way, right? They needed this enabling legislation from the federal government in order to get to a thing that, lots of cities and states have frequently, which is to say a civic conversation / argument about what the best use of a piece of land and subsidy dollars is. Should it be a stadium? Should it be a stadium that is used to leverage, housing and retail and all kinds of exciting things that cities want? Should it just be the housing and the retail, and the city is dynamic enough to not need a stadium to lure all that stuff? And that's sort of what's going to happen now. What I'm curious about, because, and this is where your point is such a good one about the Commanders being good, because there's sort of a bandwagon effect. People are excited. There's an attractive new owner after years of hating the owner.
Like, Dan Snyder wouldn't have got this deal.
Yeah,
we're kidding ourselves.
But look, I think it's not a surprise that this Congress or any Congress would do something whose primary beneficiary might be a bunch of billionaires, right? The NFL ownership collectively. It is less of a foregone conclusion that the DC council or any city council would do the same thing. The reason the team being good matters is that it sort of created a sort of positive vibe. But what's your read of the council and of the sort of city kind of activist infrastructure about whether it's going to be that easy for the mayor, who very much wants to turn this into a stadium, to get her vision through, which is also going to involve some outlay of city money?
So WJLA has this really fabulous piece about how residents are really worried that all of the new developments, the housing, the commercial stuff like restaurants, et cetera, is going to push them out. Because it's basically, they're worried it's going to be like Nationalist Park all over again, where the place kind of was a nothing burger. And then it's the shiny new thing, right? Everyone wants to live there. That means things cost more, it gets more expensive. And for current residents, they get pushed out.
Who in the council is channeling those anxieties?
Currently, nobody is speaking out, but Wendell Felder is going to take over Vince Gray's seat as council member of Ward 7. That's where the stadium is going to be. And so the path to really getting this done is going to go through him.
The person he ran against in the primary was very against stadium.
Yes.
And he was like, he did not take a position, which is kind of like taking a position.
Sure. I mean, his big thing was he wants to talk to residents to figure out, what they feel about this. And, my view on this is like, okay, like, I think I have an idea of where he wants to go on this, but there hasn't been a ton of opposition to this yet. It still has to go through the DC Council. The big thing that they're going to have to keep in mind, and this, again, is why they might push back on it, is they just gave Ted Leonsis $550 million. And that's probably going to be the starting point for the Commanders and Josh Harris. Billionaires don't like to pay for things, as we've figured out kind of, not the hard way, but in all the negotiations with Capital One Arena. And so if that's the starting point, I wonder how many council members are going to look at that and be like, oh my gosh, like, we've got this land and we've got this great opportunity, but like, do we really want a stadium there? Why can't it only be housing, commercial, et cetera? So I think that's something that they might have to keep in mind. And they could push back on the Commanders and say, hey, like, we really don't want a stadium here. You need to convince us that it's a good idea.
I feel like they're going to need the Commanders to come in to bring a reason, first of all, bring some money in, and then also bring a reason for why they're developing that area the way they are. Like, I think it'd be hard to do this without the Commanders, but I guess we'll see.
My sense is, like, if there's nobody who has sort of made themselves the, like, stick it to the man voice yet, that's a pretty good indication that this train is like way down the tracks if it's what the Commanders want to do, and that people have bought this idea that it is sort of a great matter of civic pride to have a stadium in town, and they just want to make it happen. And the other stuff, like, this debate about do you actually need a stadium to like incentivize all the other stuff that everybody kind of agrees that we want, that's going to be kind of window dressing.
Yeah, I mean, Mayor Bowser's big point is that she wants this to be an economic driver. And so if that's the case, like, are we setting up to have another fight against the mayor about like, what is downtown for, even though this is kind of a little bit removed from downtown proper? Like, but look, I mean, the argument would be, look around the country, stadiums are not in fact economic drivers or reliable ones. Nats Park is the exception, not the rule. Right.
And if no one's making that argument, then I think that's just a pretty good sense of where the political lines are right now. And it's lines that would make me very happy if I owned the Commanders. Yeah.
I mean, this is slightly naive, I acknowledge, but my hope is that they develop that area with an intention towards like making sure there's a certain amount of affordable housing and stuff like that, so that even as they build up this area, they're not fully leaning into pushing people out of their homes. And also, if they could make the stadium into a space that is more multi-use, so that it's not just for like the 8 or 9 home games that happen every year, that would be terrific, because otherwise it really does make it a hard sell for that money.
Congratulations, 2025, off to a rollicking start, because I bet, similar to Cap 1, this is what we're going to be talking about all year.
There's a bridge right behind the stadium over the Anacostia that I'd be happy to sell you guys.
Having car problems? Well, with Rhoda, getting them fixed is as easy as ordering takeout. They'll come pick up your car for free, do any repair or maintenance needed, and return it right to your driveway. They'll even give you a complimentary video inspection of your car so you can see what needs to be done. Perfect for those of us that maybe aren't so car savvy. Book your appointment online at roda.com. And lucky for you, CityCast listeners get a 20% discount on any service for up to $100 off. Just use the code CityCast20.
It's the other sort of happy news, more universally happy, even Schaefer is happy about this, at the end of 2024, was crime way down in almost all categories. Shootings and homicides down by about 30%. As you'll recall, crime in D.C. had spiked post-pandemic. We're now down to below pre-pandemic rates of homicide and shootings. One of the only things that didn't fall is carjackings. And I think that's because in the DoorDash, Uber age, there's a new opportunity that just didn't used to be as much of. But it's the panic, anxiety over crime really did shape DC politics in the past couple of years, and it I think put the mayor, who's taken a more conservative approach on this, in a stronger position. It put some of her critics, the same kind of people who might be opposed to a stadium, it kind of put some of them on the back foot because they had been associated with some of the measures that were blamed for the spike in crime. And now we're in a new moment, and it's a kind of weird one because it also coincides with the arrival of Donald Trump back in the White House, who had, during his campaign, made a big thing about D.C. as a crime-ridden hellhole that's disgracefully run, and that this was going to be an excuse for taking away power from the local government and, by extension, from us citizens who elect that local government.
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways, the anxiety around this was so high, not least because DC was one of the only cities in the country where crime continued to rise in 2023. Like, after everyone got vaccinated and pandemic started to recede in our minds, crime across the country went down. And then in DC, it kept going up and up and up. In 2023, we saw record highs in so many different categories. It's really nice to finally be in line with other major cities in this respect.
Yeah. And I'm kind of curious, like, obviously there was this huge push to up public safety, new police chief, all that stuff. Like, do we think that the stuff that they implemented really worked? Like, this would indicate, yes, some of the stuff they implemented worked.
To be honest, I don't think people ever really know why crime goes up or down. The numbers had begun to fall even before the Secure DC bill became law.
Yeah, the numbers started to go down in summer 2023, and then the Secure DC bill was passed the following spring. So some reporters were pointing that out in the press conference with Mayor Bowser, and she got a little frustrated. I think the article I was reading said that she scoffed because she was like, when crime is up, the mayor gets blamed. When crime goes down, surely it can't be all the things we passed. Like, she said something to that effect. I understand her frustration, but I also agree with you, Mike, that I don't know that anyone really knows why crime goes up and down, which is another part of the frustration.
But I think, look, at the same time, I think there's certain things, including an empowered police force that is credible in the community because they're not, viewed as a hostile occupying army, is a desirable thing that I think correlates with less crime, or at least around the margins. The, return of Trump and what it does to this mix is not just, that there's a person in the White House who may be saying trollish things about that and inaccurate things about the city being a crime-ridden hellhole. Under DC's strange system, the federal government, the president, appoints the top prosecutor, the top local prosecutor in the city, the DA that in other places is elected by the people. It has been this guy, Matthew Graves, under Bowser. It's a strange job because he was at once the chief prosecutor for these very high-profile national things like the January 6th investigation, but also the person whose employees are making the case against armed robbers and burglars and so on. He is resigning early because he would inevitably have been sacked on January 20th by Trump over January 6th stuff, if nothing else. So this question of what they put in is going to be a big deal. In the past, I don't think there's been that much practical difference between the kind of on the local prosecution level between Republican U.S. attorneys and Democratic ones, but it's a different era. And so that's a thing that could be really, really different.
I gotta say, though, the thing that I've been watching the most over the last few weeks is the judge vacancies. It kind of blows my mind that the city has been able to prosecute so many people given our judge levels. DC Superior Court Civil Division is operating without 1 in 7 judges, which is crazy.
Right. So this is another place where the strange rules governing DC come into play, because judges here, they're not elected. They're not, they are appointed by the federal government, by the president, and confirmed by the Senate. So they get caught up in all the same stuff as any other legislation does. They're not confirmed by like the Judiciary Committee that looks at Supreme Court justices. It's a different committee, but it still is liable to get in the same kind of accidental holdups as anything else. And that's what happened at the end of the year. There was a bunch of judicial nominees who were up and did not get voted on. So now Trump would have to renominate them, which is, probably unlikely, or find other people. And it's from a prosecution point of view, when they are criminal judges, that just, there's less bandwidth to do a lot of cases. When they're civil judges, there's also a kind of you and me, regular citizens, denied access to justice. If you need to redress some grievance, it makes it take all that much longer. So it's sort of like messed up and unfair, but it also, winds up having this practical effect on things like crime that have become big sore points between DC and the Congress.
Yeah, I wonder if that meeting with President Trump that Bowser had is a way to like butter him up to keep the nominations going and like shunt through people, right?
That's true. And, that's an interesting moment. They met, and she afterwards said, well, it was a constructive meeting, whatever it is that politicians always say after they meet each other, sort of general positive without any specifics. He didn't do anything. He didn't put on any of his social media or anything like that. So I don't know whether to read anything or nothing into that. But, these two have been sort of cruising for a confrontation. Bowser, despite, in D.C. itself, like, she has a reputation as being a rather non-ideological, centrist, cautious politician, someone who stays away from the most like performative, resistance-y parts of her own party. But because of the Black Lives Matter mural, because of 2020 and the pushback against the Trump's militarized National Guard situation in Republican circles, she has this reputation as being this like, person on the barricades who wants to stick it to them. And, I guess her task has been to kind of cool down that reputation. And she's clearly, up on the Hill, she worked pretty closely with some of these very conservative Republicans around, practical stuff like RFK, and managed to have, they at least turned their fire on the far left of the DC Council. Whether she can pull that same trick off with Trump, who knows? But I think if there's anyone to do it, it's probably her.
Do we know anything about what they talked about?
I mean, they talked about back to work, which they both want. That's a shared priority. She wants all those federal workers to be at their desks in downtown so that they can take their lunch breaks in downtown and spend money in downtown. Federal workers working from home has been a big Republican issue. So that's a big place where they can find some common ground. They also talked about federal real estate. And again, Bowser's push on Biden had been, listen, if you're not going to bring your people back to their offices, let us have these buildings, or, let us turn them to the private sector. Let's do something to make it so that these properties you have are at least dynamic and full of people. And that's not just the like fancy, New Deal era cabinet department headquarters, but the feds control just all kinds of faceless downtown real estate too.
Yeah, it would be ironic if Trump is the one that helps revitalize DC's downtown.
I think DC's downtown goes in long, generation-long trends, and giving any one elected official too much credit or too much blame for those trends, it's fun, but it's probably like historically, inaccurate. A lot of the stuff we don't much like now, but a lot of the west side of downtown office canyons were developed in the Reagan years. And he was not a person who people thought was going to bring a lot of life and action to Washington. And he was a big critic of the federal government and so on.
I don't know. I mean, overall, I think it's going to be interesting to see how potentially Congress meddles in this way or doesn't meddle, or if Bowser has the ear of Trump, or if she doesn't, or how much she'll placate. I think it's 2025. It's going to be weird.
Maybe they should all go to a football game together. Hey, so speaking of big criminal issues in the District of Columbia, serious, heavy-duty issues involving the law and the people who flout it, will you guys be turning right on red going forward?
I mean, if it doesn't say I can't, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so here's the thing. So DC passed a law that went into effect yesterday saying that right turns on red are now illegal in the district. But then DC Council Transportation Committee Chair Charles Allen came out and said that the Department of Transportation is not going to be enforcing a universal ban. They're going to put up signs at the intersections where you can't turn right. And those are the only places where you can't turn right, which we already have.
So they're just going to put up some more no turn on red signs.
Exactly.
Got it.
But it's confusing because now there's this law that officially says that all right turns are banned. And then the Department of Transportation is just out here like doing their press releases saying something different. So
why doesn't Charles Allen write a law repealing that law?
you know what? That's a great question. We should ask him because I don't know.
I don't mean to be holier than thou, but I think there's nothing like more corrosive than an unenforced law, because in the times it does get enforced, it'll be selective and unfair and, with all kinds of biases baked in. And, then you don't know what's legal and what's not. And it just, with the road, particularly that, like, there should be certainty. Like, this is the speed you can go. This is whether you can turn or not. Somebody in my neighborhood listserv was saying their major reason for being nervous about the new no turn on red rules was that what if they were at a corner and there was no turn on red sign, but they, as a good citizen, they were observing this rule, right? They were failing to turn on red. And what if the person behind them starts honking because they don't know about this rule?
Right. Which as out of towners won't know. So many of the people who drive on our streets are from Maryland and Virginia or even further away. And they're not sitting here reading DC laws all the time.
I mean, I think most people who go to Manhattan are aware that there's no turn on red allowed.
But it's like a famous exception.
Yes.
So do we have to be mentioned in the same breath as Manhattan as like a famous exception?
Well, no, because we're not enforcing it.
And we're not famous.
Very confusing. We're not famous.
Here's what I want to know, like from a practical standpoint, because I have Maryland plates, but I'm technically a DC resident. It's a whole thing.
How long have you been a DC resident?
Like a year, I think.
Speaking of legal violations,
Whatever.
It's a good thing those judges aren't in place to put you in jail.
Yeah. Here's what I want to know from like a practical standpoint. Is there on the Department of Transportation's website a map that I can look at with real-time info about where it is legal to turn right on red and where it is not legal to turn right on red? Because I know from driving from my apartment to, like, say, my parents' house, there are certain areas where I can't turn right on red, and there are some areas that I can because they have signs, and it's obvious.
There's no map, Julia. I'm sorry. But the DDOT spokesperson did come out and say all intersections where you can't turn right will have a sign. So hopefully there aren't supposed to be any gotcha situations in this, but I agree with Mike that there will inevitably be some point where someone gets pulled over for turning right when they were apparently not supposed to, and it's going to create a whole big drama.
Or if you need an excuse to bust somebody.
The people who were big proponents of the new law, like at least one group that I know was advocating for it, were bikers, because they say that the bike lanes are to the right of the right turn lane, and so right turns on red end up hitting bikers.
I actually think no turn on red, as a safety measure, citywide would be fine. As let's secretly find ways of making driving slower and more annoying in order to convince people to change their mode of transportation, that seems, less transparent, and I'm pro-transparency. But just as a matter of public safety, it's kind of unarguable that it's for bicyclists, for walkers, for just about everybody, it's safer.
Yeah. All right. Here, I can't wait for the CityCast DC episode where I report live from my car where I've turned right on red and there's no sign, but it's apparently illegal. I will keep you guys informed because inevitably it will happen to me.
Julia, they won't need to arrest you for that. They'll be able to get you for your improper registration.
Yeah. And they've got you on record here. Oof.
I don't know if we should hang out with her anymore, Priyanka.
Aiding and abetting.
Exactly.
Well, any listeners who also want to aid and abet Julia in her traffic
Miscreants.
miscreants, think about becoming a member of CityCast DC. It's only $8 a month or $80 for the whole year. So you get a little discount if you sign up for the whole year.
To be clear, that $80 could be spent on the ticket you will inevitably get for turning right on red, or you could spend it on us. So just saying.
Or on Julia's DC car registration.
Yes.
Yes. The money will not be going towards Julia's car registration. It helps us continue to make this podcast. We have a daily newsletter called Hey DC. It also helps fund that. And as a listener, you would get ad-free listening. You'll get a weekly events guide from our newsletter editor, Kayla, every Monday afternoon. It's exclusive to members. And then you also get the joy of supporting your favorite local media organization. So help us out. Go to membership.citycast.fm. Once again, that's membership.citycast.fm.
Priyanka, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mike.
Thanks for being here.
Say, Mike.
And that is all for today here on CityCast DC. Our production team this week was Priyanka Tilve, Julia Karen, Ash Durbin, and Francisco Kilgore. Newsletter editor Kayla Cote-Stemmerman wrote our fabulous newsletter Hey DC this week. And our hosts are Bridget Todd and me, Michael Schaefer from Politico. Music is by Alex Roldan. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell the officer who pulls you over after you turn on red? We'll be back Monday morning with more news from around the city. Bye.